Welcome to the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast, your go-to source for insightful interviews and dynamic panel discussions in the worlds of Treasury, banking, payments, fintech, and much more. Here now is your host, the Treasury Whisperer, Seth Marlowe.
Hello, Whisperees. Joining me today in the Whisperer studio is Mark Brousseau. Mark is president of Brousseau Associates. Over the past 30 years, he has established himself as a thought leader on accounts payable, accounts receivable, payments, and document automation. A popular speaker at industry conferences and on webinars and podcasts like this one, Mark advises prominent end users and solutions and services providers on how to use automation to improve document and payments-driven business processes. Mark has chaired numerous educational conferences and has served on several industry committees and boards. He resides in Center City, Philadelphia, with his wife and 3 sons. Mark, welcome to the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Seth. I am a little afraid I might be in the wrong place. As a guy who grew up in New Jersey, whispering, not really my strong suit, but I'm going to try and be informative nonetheless.
Well, Mark, I am originally a New Yorker, so whispering really wasn't one of my talents until I guess I moved to Connecticut.
We've got loud down, Seth. Now let's hope we can actually get the informative part down for the next little bit here.
Exactly. I don't think we'll have any problem with that. So, Mark, I ask almost all of my guests that come on to the show about how they started getting into the payments or banking or treasury space. And interestingly, you've had your own company. You've been at that for like 25 plus years. Was that even a plan? I mean, how did that all kind of play out and get you into this wonderful world of payments?
So, Seth, I am a great example of college education maybe gone wrong. I went to Syracuse University with the express goal of becoming a daily newspaper reporter for city governments. I wanted to be that guy with the pad running around city halls, muckraking. And sure enough, senior year at Syracuse, I went home and interviewed with the Asbury Park Press, the second biggest newspaper in New Jersey at the time. And they offered me a job, Seth, to cover 3 large cities on the Jersey Shore. And I thought I had made it. They marched me down the hall to HR. They sat me down and then they told me what I'd make. And it was a union shop with step raises. And I'm looking at these numbers and I'm like, holy cow, I'm going to live at home forever. And so I went back to college. That wasn't going to work. And I said, guys, I talked to everybody in my network. I need a different career path. And you know what, Seth? I had a buddy who was working, and this is really going to date me. There were business-to-business newsletters that were published out of Washington, D.C., and they covered, this is before the internet, so they covered little slivers of industries. And it turned out that this guy's company he was working for needed somebody to write about payments. Turned out the editor was going on maternity leave and they were pretty sure she wasn't coming back. And so they brought me down to DC during a spring break, interviewed me, and they said, what do you know about payments? I said, not a darn thing. And they say, well, you seem pretty eager. And I said, oh yeah, that I am. And they offered me a gig that paid me considerably more than the Asbury Park Press. And no offense to the Asbury Park Press if you're listening,
Sure.
Lovely, lovely people. And I took this job and learned payments from the ground up. And over the course of several years, Seth, you start speaking at conferences and then the vendors start calling, right? They all want you to do sales for them. I had no interest in that. But then I got a call from a company that had the first ever check imaging solution. Now I'm really dating myself, folks. Check imaging solution for community banks. At the time, it was just Unisys and IBM and Hogan System. I don't even know if some of those companies even existed.
Well, I can tell you Hogan does because I know a certain bank that I worked for still uses that as their core operating platform.
There you go. And they said, we need somebody to be an evangelist. You're going to ride around the Midwest of the United States in a car we're going to give you. And you're going to have the local Federal Reserve bank sales rep with you. And you're going to go to small banks and tell them why they should do check imaging. And the Fed was totally in on this because they wanted to sell those big mag tapes with the in-clearings. That's how this whole scheme worked.
Sure.
And sure enough, Seth, this thing went bonkers. We went from $0 to $6 million in about 2.5 years. The company got sold. I put myself out of a job. And then Then I went from selling to small banks to selling to large banks in the lockbox space. And this was going well. Like I helped rebrand the company, helped launch a product, and seemingly was great. But I was bored out of my mind. I needed challenge. I needed stress, Seth. And so then 9/11 happened. And I decided this is it. This is my chance. I'm going to go out on my own. If I make it in this economy, I know I'm onto something. And if I fail, I'll go get another job. As if in hindsight, it would have been that easy, but I digress. And here I am all these years later. And, you know, I specialize in payments automation and AR, Treasury, as well as accounts payable. Many folks know me in the AP space through my association with IOFM. But it's been a great ride. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And Seth, every day is different. Every day is completely different. But I've seen payments evolve from all checks to today where we have this mix of payment instruments. And I think the future is even more exciting.
It is. I have to say this as we're on video and those people that will be listening in audio only format. So they won't get the benefit of this, but the headset and a microphone looks really good on your head.
I've got a big round head that seems to kind of fit it. It looks almost cartoonish, my kids would say.
No, I don't know about that, but certainly having been at Syracuse, perhaps you should have gone the way of the communication school. Maybe you were actually part of that, and perhaps gone down the broadcast route as opposed to the newspaper writing component.
I might have missed my chance to be on ESPN or some other outlet bloviating about something not nearly as interesting as payments and AP, AR, and Treasury, Seth.
Well, I don't know if we can continue this podcast. Bloviating?
See, I guess I am putting that Syracuse education to good use. Look at that.
You certainly are. I was not that far away from you, my friend. I was down probably about, 70 miles south of you at Binghamton.
My gosh.
Certainly had aspired when I hit the sports radio bug. I realized, why am I at Binghamton? I should have gone to as a typical New Yorker would call it, Syracuse.
You could have come up and hung out with me at Marshall Street. You know, Binghamton, by the way, the birthplace of Dick's Sporting Goods. This is an FYI.
That is correct.
But my senior year at Syracuse, we had in 1 month, we had 4 feet of snow. And it was crazy. And as a kid from New Jersey, it took a lot of getting used to. I had to carry my girlfriend on my back to the car because they don't plow a lot there, right? They got to wait for everything to be done before they shovel or plow. And so we were trying to get out of my apartment to our car. And I literally had to carry her because she's petite and she just couldn't walk in the snow. But what great times!
I got to ask: Did this girlfriend end up ultimately being your wife, or did she let go of you?
Seth, I have the most expensive college education ever. I got a degree and a wife from Syracuse University, and now my youngest son is on his way this fall there. It's just that the checks keep going.
And you're still doing it by check. At least I certainly hope you're not. But, my friend, I acquired my wife in Binghamton. And
there's something about those cold winter nights.
Absolutely.
And the warm beer that apparently makes us more appealing.
That's right. That is right. So I want to go back to something. You mentioned one of the organizations that you are often affiliated with, and then there are 2 of them that come to mind for me. You mentioned IOFM, which is the Institute of Financial Management. The other one, and you and I have done some things together with them, is CMLI, the Cash Management Leadership Institute. For the benefit of the audience here, tell us about IOFM and then maybe pivot into CMLI as well.
You got it. So IOFM.com is the largest accounts payable, accounts receivable membership organization in the world. They have tens of thousands of AP and AR professionals who are members and active in the organization. Many of them are actually certified, right? You earn a certification either as a manager or as a frontline professional in those careers. I've had the distinct pleasure of being a part of IOFM since the start for more than 13 years now. They use me as a subject matter expert, but it's been really exciting to be a part of IOFM because I've gotten a front row seat in the evolution of accounts payable. You know, Seth, for years, AP was the quintessential back office function. These were the people in the basement with the hand-me-down office furniture, the off-brand coffee. People only called them when things went wrong. Where's my invoice? Where's my payment? You did this wrong. Well, that's really started to change. And interestingly, I think it started to change in the last recession we had here in the U.S. back in 2008. I'm putting aside the COVID, of course. But what happened then, I believe, is that corporate America was caught with its proverbial pants down, right? Finance leaders didn't know where they stood with their cash, and it really exacerbated that credit crisis back then. Now, I'm sort of oversimplifying things, but by and large, it's what happened. And the reason this happened was because all that information that AP sits on was where it was trapped in file cabinets and banker boxes. Some of the banker boxes stored in salt mines. I'm not making that up. And nobody could get at that data. Well, CFOs and treasurers reasoned, hey, if we could just unlock some of that information, well, now we could figure out what's going on with our cash flows. We can understand where we're spending our money. And so we started to see an evolution in AP. And it's really picked up gas during the pandemic. I think we had this confluence of pressures and technologies and things elevating in the profession. And now we're seeing AP get a seat at the strategic decision-making table because in reality, AP has a huge role to play in these decisions. The problem is if we're still bogged down manually processing invoices and onboarding suppliers and making payments via check, but we don't have time for the strategic decision making that AP can do. And so we're seeing this evolution of not only AP leaders, but of their departments, and then the ones that do it right, of their businesses. And this is a great segue to the Cash Management Leadership Institute. So over time, as AP evolved, IOFM got more and more phone calls from Treasury leaders saying, hey, we are playing a bigger role in AP and AR because of the cash management and spend management elements.
Right.
What do you have for us? And so they launched CMLI, cashmanagement.org. And it's this wealth of resources and videos and webinars, all free of charge, by the way. No membership fee to get at this stuff. But for treasurers, it's some hands-on tools in how it is you can achieve best-in-class capabilities in your treasury function. And like AP, treasurers are becoming more strategic now, right? I talk to treasurers all the time, Seth, as you do, who say, man, I've got a room full of MBAs who spend all their time each day wrangling spreadsheets.
That is correct.
We've got all these bank relationships, all these bank portals. We've got all these investment accounts. We've got to pull all this information in, put it in the spreadsheet just to figure out our forecast. Forecasting is a mess in this country. And AI is helping to get this going. But really, the thinking that treasurers are doing is, man, we've got to make this more strategic. So now this is all starting to tie together. And we're seeing the same evolution over in AR too. But between IOFM and CMLI, I've been so lucky to have this bird's eye view of an evolution that's happening in financial services that I think is going to start to pick up steam because of AI.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. So relative to IOFM, CMLI, how do you see AFP fitting into that? Association Financial Professionals. Once upon a time, it was the Treasury Management Association, and they tacked on FP&A, Financial Planning Analysis, another great portion of the Office of the CFO. Seems like put them together, you've got a heck of a triple thread or a little bit of a hat trick going on there.
I think you're absolutely right. They're really complementary, and AFP is obviously the gold standard when it comes to strategic thinking around cash management, right? And I'm old enough I was at the conference when they rebranded away from TMA to AFP. Gosh, we're old. But I think, when I think about AFP, they really are that macro level. They're strategic decision making and big ideas around things like trade finance and derivatives, so things that IOFM or even CMLI might not get into the trenches on. And what IOFM and CMLI do is they complement AFP by talking about best practices in these two professions. And they're very targeted at how they approach it. So I think there's room for all three organizations. I'm active in all. I'll be speaking at AFP in Las Vegas, and I'll be speaking at IOFM in Austin this fall. So I think there's room for everyone. And I think there's value for your listeners in being a part of all three.
Yep. That's a really good point. There's so much readily available information that's out there, and you don't necessarily need AI to get to it. It's been out there and available for a long time. AI is not bringing anything necessarily additional to the table for some of those topics.
Yeah. And what's really important when we talk about AI, right, we're always concerned about that human in the loop, making sure there's human judgment. Well, at IOFM, for instance, there's an Ask the Expert function where you could go on their website and you can ask an accounts payable or accounts receivable related question and know that a seasoned peer is going to be the one responding to you. So this isn't some canned Gen AI answer that will largely be right. This is by someone who's lived the issue that you're asking about. Where are you going to find that? I mean, that's a great resource, and it's something I encourage your listeners to take a look at on the IOFM website.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why when I was in the early stages of my banking career, which was my second or third career, depending on how I choose to count them up, I had so much fun walking into Treasury organizations as part of a banking team because I had been in that chair as a treasurer and a Treasury analyst and an IT person who owned the Treasury platforms and was able to talk to them like a Treasury peer as opposed to a banker. And it was a very different conversation. And I had lived a lot of the things that they were struggling with. And in fact, many times when I was presenting at conferences and was talking about something like accounts receivable, I would ask the question of how many people in the room had actually ever done cash application. Well, I was able to raise my hand because I'd done that. I'd had my frustrations over doing that. I knew exactly the pain points. Did I have pain points?
Yeah. Deductions. Yeah.
Bane of my existence at Pepsi and Dannon.
Still. Oh yeah, the poster children for needing tools. Yeah, and that's the one thing I fear we might lose as we move into this AI era or whatever we're calling it these days. Seth, is we want to make sure we keep a human in the loop for just what you described, right? Even forums like this to be able to bring together peers to share those stories from the trenches. That's what's so valuable about those organizations you were just mentioning and forums like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a justification in my case for the gray hair I have. And I suppose for you, the no hair you have.
Well, at least the headset fits well.
It does. It does. It's a good look.
I don't have to worry about headset head at the end of the day.
No, I have that problem. And as I've allowed my hair to get longer, it's become a bigger problem. So Mark, I want to ask you something. I've enjoyed being on stage at conferences, sharing sessions with you. For those in the audience, Mark and I have been part of it's almost become a group, and I feel like we could even have an alumni association for it. And we call the Payment Squad. It's a group of payment professionals and beyond, because I don't know that every one of them would necessarily consider themselves a payments geek. And over the course of a number of years, this has been a session at T. Manny's New York Cash Exchange, which comes up this September, which Mark will not be joining us for this year. So we relegated back to my buddy Wayne Brown will be substituting in for you as moderator. But moderator was the point. One of the things that you do better than anyone I've seen, sorry, Wayne, but this is one Mark's got you beat out here, is you've got the knack of how to transition from panelist to panelist, and your lightning rounds, you don't let anybody not go at lightning speed. How do you do this? I mean, to me, it's something I need to emulate, and I've got a upcoming panel I'm going to be leading. And I've always got in my head, I got to be like Mark.
Well, you're too kind, and you've been a great panelist. I'd give you a solid A. I mean, you are my go-to guy. I'm genuinely curious about the types of topics we talk about. Whether it's at T-Mani or AFP, where I'm moderating a panel, or at IOFM. I kind of get fired up about AP and AR and Treasury and payments, and my kids laugh at me. They call me a nerd or a geek, but it's interesting. I truly believe, Seth, as I think you do as well, is that if we don't bring the passion to these conversations, well, the listener or the participant just isn't going to feel it either. So what's the point here, right? And so I actually get excited about this stuff. And my lightning rounds are the things that either panelists love or they absolutely abhor. Aaron Chazen, I'm thinking of you right now, but these are questions that are truly on my mind. So I try to channel what I think the audience is wondering about. What's going on with blockchain? I mean, is AI for real? What am I going to do about this fraud, right? I try to think of all the things that somebody sitting in row 6 might have been asked about by their boss in the past week, put it into the pithiest question possible, and then put the panelist in the uncomfortable position of giving me an answer in 30 seconds. And you know what? For some reason, Seth, it just works. And maybe it's our social media environment we're in because we all think like X. I don't know, something like that.
I think that has a lot to do with it. And I know from having been on stage so many times, the absolute killer for me is to look into the audience and see someone who's dozed off. It kills me. I think I realized a long time ago that it's not just sharing your knowledge and being a thought leader, but there's a little bit of entertainment that needs to be in your I'll say in your shtick to keep the audience interested in the subject matter. And let's face it, a lot of this stuff can be particularly boring unless you spice it up.
That's right. I mean, stablecoins for 60 minutes could be kind of tough unless you put a spin on it. Now, I will take a moment, by the way. You mentioned people dozing off. The one that gets me, Seth, is when somebody gets up to take a call. You can see they have their phone, or at least they're pretending to have a phone call. That drives me crazy. I always want to shout, tackle him, tackle her. No, don't let him go. At least the dozing off person keeps my head count up. The person who leaves to go get a call, that's an affront on 2 levels, right? Number 1, they're leaving. And number 2, it's the content wasn't more important than the phone call. So to all of you listening, if you get a phone call during one of my sessions, for goodness sake, please just call them back 45 minutes later, okay? It can wait. Unless it's your kid and something really, really important.
Yeah, but more often than not, it's probably a manager who's demanding something.
A deduction over at Pepsi, right? I mean, my exactly. God, Marlowe left us in this terrible position. We still can't figure this out all these years later.
$20 deduction.
Hanging out there.
We're spending more money to talk about it than to resolve it or just to write it off.
You talk about deductions, Seth. I'm amazed. I was just talking to a really, really large company. I won't say their name for obvious reasons. As a story I'll tell you, but they told me that deductions are still such a challenge for them, even after automating. Oh, I did air quotes. Nobody can see that but you.
Right.
But even after allegedly automating, that this company writes off any deduction less than $250, no questions asked, because they calculated that it costs more than $250 to research, or that's the cost to research and resolve a standard deduction. So all day long, this company's customers can just take $250 off the top, and they won't even look at it. It'll just go through. And I'm thinking to myself, how much money are we talking about here at this company? And then multiply by all the companies. And this is that friction we talk about, right? So folks say, how important is AP? How important is AR? It's really Treasury and cash management where things go. But you got to remember, these operational functions, We have so much cash, Seth, trapped in these inefficient processes that are in the trenches that it's costing businesses trillions of dollars. And deductions are just one example.
No, completely. In the same light, I mean, one of the challenges I saw when I was consulting to customers from the bank side on both AP and AR was just the mere fact that as the business would ramp, the number of resources needed to do this work would ramp as well. There was no economy of scale. It didn't matter if you were offshoring. You would just need more people offshore. If you were doing it in-house, you needed more people. And there were any number of companies that were refusing to automate despite the recommendations and yet complaining that their employee costs, their comp costs were going through the roof because they couldn't keep up with the high growth. I mean, it's a good problem to have, but it's a problem nonetheless. And it's something you just hard for them to grapple with. It's like automate.
Yeah. Seth, I just spoke earlier today to an AP leader at a construction adjacent company that is going to do 17 acquisitions this year. 17. This company is experiencing just meteoric growth, and it's been going on over the past several years. And when this acquisition binge started several years ago, they hit that ceiling you just described. They just couldn't find people anymore, right?
Yep.
You can't hire them, onboard them, train them fast enough. And they said, holy mackerel, we have got to automate. And now they're in a position where with these 17 acquisitions, they're going to be able to support that volume with their AI-powered AP automation solution they already have in place. They're not going to need to hire more staff. Now, that's bad news for the AP teams that are currently at those companies they're acquiring. But this shows you how AI and automation can be a growth driver, right? So we talk about finance helping grow the business, right? A lot of people think that's lip service, but the reality is the types of topics you're talking about with your guests on this podcast on a regular basis are growth drivers, right? These are big topics. And so you've got to embrace automation. I don't care how big or how small you are. And in some cases, it's easier to do it when you're smaller, right? Before you get all the legacy ERPs and all the other convoluted systems in place.
Well, that's for sure. Common question that is often asked of customers. I certainly ask this of many. What ERP are you on? And depending on the business and whether they've been through acquisitions, it could be one or two or three. But people would ask me that question in my GE days, and I looked at them with 12 heads and said, are you kidding me? All of them. I have all of them. I have every version of all of them.
You have instances. Yeah, you've got a bunch of instances of some of them, right? Yeah.
But there was so much in a company like GE, and there are still many companies that are out there that a large part of the growth strategy is acquisition. And what we had at GE that was fairly unique was we had a Treasury integration team. All they did was work with the different business units and the companies that were being acquired to be able to get them onto the GE platforms, get them up onto our treasury management system, get them doing payments that way, get them banking with the right banks and doing all of this transition, conversion, migration work. That team never rested. It was always something going on. And then when they started winding down a lot of pieces of GE Capital, that very same team was deployed to go in the opposite direction and do the disintegration, if you will.
Unplug everything. Disintegration. There you go. That's exactly right. Seth, it is funny because integration is still a huge issue all across finance. And that's where one of the areas where I am hopeful that AI is going to help us, right? And I think finance leaders should embrace it from that perspective. We have so many disconnected standalone systems and processes and even people, depending on how you define things, that I think AI can really help us smooth out some of these gaps in our processes without having to move to monolithic systems. I'm looking at you ERP vendors, without having to move to monolithic systems and extend the value of the investments we've made. So I think when we talk about disintegration, and I think that this is one area where AI can really help us fill in those gaps.
I completely agree with you. And I think perhaps the biggest use case that is underrepresented in the marketplace is all about the data and the continuous data cleansing that's necessary. And I think too many organizations over time have looked at an acquisition or some other kind of event as the reason to have to do a data cleanup, or it's a new system that's being implemented. We got to clean the data. But it's not a one-time event. It's something that there's continually data that's getting into systems that is off in some attribute or another. And I think the use case for AI to be out there continually monitoring all of the data and finding those anomalies and either correcting them themselves or identifying it to the humans who actually can then go and fix it. And the sooner it's fixed, the better that data set will be for all the decisions that'll actually have to be made off of that data.
Yeah, we have a real problem right now with fraud in this country, right? It's near all-time high. And I think it goes back to that data problem that you just described. Think about how filthy the data is in a typical finance department, right? We don't want to look at our vendor master databases, right?
No.
The duplicates, and we have a free-for-all on who can enter things in many organizations. And in many cases, that data is not validated. We've really got to have a serious conversation with ourselves as organizations about the way we go about onboarding suppliers and making changes to vendor records. And I think once we do that, we're going to start to chip away at some of these fraud issues. I mean, look, phony bank account change requests are running rampant right now. And a big part of that is because while every organization has policies and procedures in place for validating bank account ownership, in many cases, they're manually done, right? Somebody picks up a phone and calls somebody they think they know at the supplier, right? And verifies this is you. Well, AI has kind of made that a moot point now, right? Because now we know AI can impersonate suppliers, whether it's in an email, a text, voice, and now even video. God forbid they mimic my image. But now this idea of picking up a phone is as antiquated as responding to the email itself. So we need to find tools that are going to, verify supplier information, verify the supplier, validate the information that the supplier gives us, put controls in place in how that information is managed, not just at the point of onboarding, but over time, and then finally continuously monitor it. Hey, it's time to get new tax stocks for Seth or what have you. But I think with those 4 pillars, then we could start to really move the needle when it comes to things like fraud. Same challenge over at AR when it comes to customer onboarding. It's almost as bad a mess. And so I think, to your point, we've got to have a really pointed discussion around data and data hygiene as finance leaders. And the dirty secret, Seth, as you alluded to, AI is not going to work so well if we keep shoveling bad data into it. We're going to get it's going to be like those crazy Gen AI responses that you get, right? You're like, well, this isn't right. And then you look at the source information like, well, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, we wonder why AI might hallucinate. Well, it hallucinates because if you had to spend your life looking at dirty data, you'd probably be doing something like hallucinating as well.
Exactly. Garbage in, garbage out. It's true in finance and it's true with AI. So
it is. And there's another aspect of this that has always bothered me. And it's kind of a double-edged sword for me because I was always very good at finding workarounds to problems. And the challenge with so many systems was that there would be certain things that a certain platform just couldn't handle. So you had to figure out a way around it. And the more creative you got, the more you really dirtied your data. And a perfect example I'll use from the AP world is the terms of payment. And you may have with the same vendor multiple different sets of terms for different kinds of products that are being purchased. And what I've seen in those vendor master files, frankly, have been, the same vendor set up multiple times, but each one of them is set up with different terms because the terms are associated with the vendor master in some platforms. And try to clean that up, and no hierarchy to say, oh, all those 3 instances of, I'll pick on IBM because that's the example I've been using for 20 years. There's no roll-up structure to say that the IBM with 30-day terms, 60-day terms, and 90-day terms, oh, that's all IBM. So you're left with this mess. And some of them you're not going to get rid of until you get that platform upgraded or completely swapped out.
You just made a great argument for why we need to get rid of these point solutions, these fragmented systems and processes. Because when we rely on human judgment, even when the human has the best intentions, we're inevitably going to end up in this quagmire of rotten data. Because the person out in the field at that regional office who set up IBM for the 50th time in our database, right?
Look, it's in my SOP. This is what you do.
Did they followed the process, but what we've missed is purpose over process, right? And that's, we've got, as finance leaders, we've really got to go back to the drawing board on these things. And this is where automation and AI can be our friend, I think.
I definitely agree with you there. I hope that we'll see a lot of that taking shape once there's the trust factor that AI can do this and it doesn't have to be babysat by a team of humans that have to, either do the execution work, or then if they're not doing the execution of it, they're supervising it and approving it. So I think we still have a long, long ways to go.
I think you're right.
So let's get back to payments a little bit. So we've talked a whole bunch about AP and AR and AI. The payments landscape has been fascinating to watch the last, I'd say 3 years, with really the emergence of 2 real-time payment networks in the US, which both have a ways to go in terms of the capabilities that are there. A lot of organizations are looking at stablecoins as another method to have the same impact. Kind of curious your perspective on where we are today and where we're headed with all of this.
So I'm excited about the steps we've taken in the U.S. around real-time payments. And to your point, the volume growth has been, not significant yet, but it's getting there, and the use cases are starting to evolve. What excites me is that real-time payments are coming at a time when we also are seeing more and more thinking around embedded finance, right? Or that integration of systems that we were talking about earlier. And to me, these go hand in hand, because while we can argue that cash is king, I would say that data is the trump card. So the trick is once we can combine embedded payments with real-time payments, now we can have those faster payments carry that rich remittance data along with them, that gets us out of this morass of friction in AP and AR that bogs down everything in finance. And I think we can use Europe. Dear, I'm going to go right into the deep end of the pool, right? Don't worry, folks. I'm not going to talk about air conditioning or ranch dressing, but
what about the World Cup?
Or the World Cup, right?
We're the champion there.
But let's look there where they have these account to account transactions and things flow largely seamlessly and touch free. This is what we should be striving for. And I think that as long as we stay bogged down in some of these older processes around AP, we're never going to achieve escape velocity and get that frictionless environment that we want. Similarly, I'm excited about stablecoins as a liquidity tool, particularly for global payments. I've talked to a couple of vendors who are excited about the opportunities around things like trade finance and financing of freight transactions. And I think stablecoins, unlike crypto, really does have that potential for us. And I'm excited to see the banks at least embracing the discussion. And now we're seeing some large enterprises already using it. I think what we're seeing is finally some maturation of thinking around payments that isn't a spin on the same old. And this is exciting for finance leaders. My only advice to your attendees is let's make sure that as Treasury and finance professionals, we're taking the leadership position here, right? This is our chance to really, stake out some use cases, to create some pilots, and to prove to the CFO that these are tools that we could be using to help drive the business forward, not just reduce some costs and mitigate fraud, but to really help be a driver of growth.
No, that is a fabulous point. And I think it's probably worth stating that none of this is necessarily a technology issue. It's business process, it's money movement, and it's about efficiencies in doing all of this. I was having a very interesting conversation. I've had some very interesting conversations for this show, on this show, over the course of the last week or two. And two notable things. One is that we are dealing with constructs that really don't need to be at the forefront of everything. And one example that was given to me by an executive from a fintech firm was the whole concept of a bank account. That is a structure, a construct that was invented years and years and years ago. And no CFO thinks in terms of bank account. They think in terms of a business, their business, or a business unit. And frankly, could really care less in most cases what bank account the payment comes out of or comes into. And we're kind of stuck in that world because that's how money moves. You need to say where the money's coming from and where it's going to. And the answer to that question of from and to is a bank account. So that's one thing that I think needs to needs to dissipate a little bit. Let AI figure that out. It doesn't need to be so much at the forefront. The second thing, and I think you'll love this one, Mark, is we are in this world of, we talk 24/7, but yet we still have the construct of a work week and weekends. And of course,
and holidays.
And holidays. And so banks are closed, money doesn't move, but with real-time payments, with stablecoins, with blockchain, everything's always on. And so the question I always ask is, how do we adapt to those changes, both for the workers that need to do things, both for the processes that need to change so that they don't resume their batch orientation first thing Monday morning, and then the processing ends sometime Friday night as well. So we need to adapt to that. But what one of my guests said to me last week was, he said, once we've got all of this moving in real time, we can start looking at optimizing cash in a manner where for 3.5 minutes, I'm going to be able to put my money away, put it aside to be able to earn interest. And that the increments that we're looking at are an end of day and a zero balance sweep, or an offshore money market sweep. It's going to be in the minutes. It's going to be in the seconds where companies are going to be able to invest and likewise borrow based on what their net total cash position is. Things that, kind of sound to anyone that's been around this space for a long time, it sounds ludicrous, but I think that's where we're headed. And so there's a lot of adjustment that's going to have to happen for people to adapt to that. But I think ultimately becomes a lot simpler.
Yeah. And these are the types of discussions we're going to have. And I think the key message in both of those cases is we're throwing the playbook out the window, right? So finance leaders need to be ready to adapt to change. And by the way, your banker friends, they better buckle up too, because for years we've heard the argument, well, banks could never be disintermediated because they own the bank accounts. Well, the fact is that some of the fintechs that banks have been doing business with for the past several years now have the wherewithal to facilitate those types of digital wallets or digital accounts that you just described at a scale that, well, quite frankly, a lot of smaller banks can't. And so this is going to become a really fascinating situation, to say nothing about the ERP vendors themselves. I mean, many of them have already owned payments companies. What role might they play in this new environment where a bank account is not necessarily needed? So these are the types of discussions I think both finance leaders and bankers need to be ready to address head on if they want to continue to be relevant.
I so agree with you there. And of course, there's the other thing that's going on is that, all of the fintechs that are going down the path of trying to get some form of a banking license. Mm-hmm. So what happens when an SAP potentially becomes, in addition to a software company, becomes a bank? I have no idea. I'm not saying this to anybody that's happening. I'm using it strictly as an example. But Bank of SAP could then manage all of that through their software and to have much more control over the entire end-to-end process.
Yeah. And I don't know how the regulatory element of all that plays out, but that is certainly something that we need to watch.
For sure. Well, this has been a really fun conversation, Mark. You and I could probably go at this for, I would say, probably another hour. But my guess is, similar to being up on stage and not wanting to see people falling asleep, I think we could keep them entertained for another hour.
Yeah, we want to make sure our runtime is shorter than the Odyssey, right?
That's right. That's right. I'm not showing up anytime soon to see the Odyssey. It was bad enough that one of the last English papers I wrote in high school and one of the first that I wrote in college was based on the Odyssey.
Dear.
Yeah, I may have gotten some help from the high school one to write the college one, but that's a whole nother story. That's what seeing that going to the movie theaters has brought back.
You were Gen AI before there was Gen AI. Look at that,
That is correct.
You were ahead of your time, Marlowe. This has been great.
Mark
Thanks
Brousseau,
so much for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me here in the Whisperer studio. To my whisperees out there, that is a wrap for today. If you want to get your message out to the Treasury, banking, payments, and fintech world, I have an answer for you. Consider sponsoring an episode of the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast and get your executive leaders to join me in conversations similar to what Mark and I have just done. If you're interested, send us an email at info@treasurywhisperer.com. Until next time, folks, on the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast, this is Seth Marlowe saying bye-bye for now.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast with Seth Marlowe. The Treasury Whisperers Talkcast podcast is produced by the Treasury Whisperer Studio and Treasury Whisperer LLC. Copyright 2025. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this podcast without the express written consent of Treasury Whisperer LLC is strictly prohibited.